All right, here we go. We've got Abu Bakr, who is the CEO of Recursive Capital and also sits on the board of the Bitcoin Trust. I'm super excited about this. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hi, Pomp. Hi, guys. I'm doing great.
Amazing. I'm so excited to talk to you. I feel like you have a unique insight into a place in the world of various countries across Africa that are at the forefront of Bitcoin adoption, not only from what we're actually seeing in terms of where it's being used and adopted, but also the importance of Bitcoin. Right here in the United States, there's a lot of people who are like, "Oh yeah, Bitcoin's cool. It's one of a lot of different, investment assets that I have, and maybe it's going to go up in price, maybe it won't." But there's a lot of folks, my understanding, across Africa, who this is a lifeline. This is, incredibly important. And so maybe let's just start with when you think about kind of all of the work you've done, all of the data and information that you've gathered over the last few years, what is the importance of Bitcoin to various African nations?
Oof. That's definitely a great one. So historically, going back to the early days of when Bitcoin came into the continent, a lot of it was speculation, as you would expect. A lot of people got into Bitcoin hard, thinking they'll be millionaires overnight. That resulted in a lot of scams coming into the continent, which was really bad for the PR of Bitcoin overall. But then over the years, what we started seeing, especially with regards to younger generations, is they're now noticing that Bitcoin is more than just this speculative asset or like this number go up technology. And there's a lot more to it, specifically from the angle of a superior monetary network. And one of the major things or major benefits that they do see really early on is, first of all, via the integration of the Lightning Network, which is through BitNow, for example, is a lot of people are starting to see that you can actually use Bitcoin on a day-to-day, both in terms of remittance as well as local commerce, which is unheard of in terms of using local currencies. Number one, these currencies having a lot of inflation. They see these currencies, even in terms of intra-country trade, a lot of that is not really done so smoothly, so to speak. But with Bitcoin, it allows you to have access to an open monetary network that is global, instant, cheap. So it's one of those things where over the years, we've seen a lot of more people move out of the speculative bubble and into actual use cases like remittance, like I said, commerce, and then leveraging this technology to actually send money cheaply. And the thing is, not only is it banking the unbanked, it is also providing a viable alternative to those that are currently banked. Because again, the problem with even those that are banked is they're getting underbanked, so to speak, which is having all these unreliable bank services at their disposal, as opposed to being able to access Bitcoin, which is a superior system, so to speak. So really, those are the trends that we're seeing, and will likely continue to increase as more wallets start to introduce, the Lightning Network, for example. So these are kind of the trends that we're seeing, and at least the good use cases that are being used, which is, thank God, outside of speculation.
Yeah, it's fascinating to kind of think about many of these countries, right? I think it was 2016 or so, I think I went to Nigeria. And one of the things that just blew me away was the internet penetration and the mobile phone penetration. Everyone had a phone and they were all in some form or fashion connected to the internet. And I probably was in kind of the computer village area in Lagos. So, definitely maybe like a little bit of an outlier from just the local economy. But when I think about that experience, you have to get the internet penetration. You have to get the mobile phone penetration in order for Bitcoin adoption to actually be present and to have that solution available. And so talk to me about kind of your understanding of where are we? Is it pretty much the default now that most young people are aware of the internet, use the internet, have mobile devices? Do they have internet access in their home? Where are we in some of these countries?
Yeah, so it varies because Africa is quite a huge continent, and specifically with regards to infrastructure, both energy-wise and in terms of internet infrastructure, it really varies a lot. So you're going to see a lot more of the, so to speak, developed energy infrastructure around the north parts of Africa and some parts of the south, like South Africa, for example, and Western Africa, with Ghana having 24 hours electricity, and then with Nigeria, not so much really when it comes to energy. And then with internet penetration, really it's less fragmented than the energy distribution across the continent, which is good for adoption specifically, like you mentioned. And one of the things we're seeing specifically with regards to the demographics using Bitcoin is not only are we seeing younger people, we're also seeing older generations who are mom and pop stores actually getting access to Bitcoin. Because now with BitNow, for example, one of the use cases we're seeing grow is actually having these shop owners allow individuals to pay them in Bitcoin using BitNow. So they act as sort of this merchant system where people can actually interact directly with Bitcoin. And we're going to be seeing a lot more adoption with regards to using, POS systems over the Lightning Network. Now, specifically with regards to smartphone penetration, like you're talking about, it's really, really high. And again, pairing that with the youthful population, all that we're seeing is a lot more young people being actively, available online, which is great for using something like Bitcoin, which is digital and, digital native. So the thing I was specifically seeing with regards to, adoption when it comes to pairing, the penetration rate as well as mobile phone adoption is we have to start thinking more in terms of trying to get more decentralized internet infrastructure here, or at least some sort of resilient internet infrastructure. So specifically things like mesh networking and some other ways in order to have a less of a reliance on some of the substandard internet infrastructure that we have on the continent, which we'll likely see more of going down the road.
Yeah, it's fascinating to kind of think about this. When you think about Bitcoin development, it's a weird thing where there's developers across the world who try to build technology for other groups. It could be in my own country. It could be someone in another country. It could be for a different language, a different religion, whatever it is. But there's a huge advantage if you're able to build technology for you, right? And build technology for your local community or the people that you grew up with, et cetera. What is the state currently of Bitcoin development in some of these countries? And then how do you think about the importance of making sure that people who not only are from African nations, but actually live in African nations are participating in the Bitcoin development process?
Yeah, so that's definitely a great one. And, over the years, we've seen quite a lot of progress in terms of actual development overall. So I like people to, think of development as more of a holistic chunk in terms of Bitcoin. So when we say development, we're not specifically only narrowing it down to developers per se. We're also looking at individuals that are contributing overall to the ecosystem. So we're talking about language translation, for example, which there are great strides being made across the continent. So there are the individuals that are actively working on translating a lot of the Bitcoin material into their native languages, into Amharic and some of the other languages, which is great because you think about it, people can only benefit from Bitcoin if they know about it. And if everything is locked into English, so to speak, then they're locked out essentially from having this information readily available to them. Now, when it comes to developers, we're seeing a lot more people at least recognize that, number one, there's some sort of viable job option when it comes to actually working on Bitcoin, and it's not just a bunch of folks who are working pro bono, So unfortunately, obviously, there are a couple of shitcoin projects that come into the continent and just, airdrop a ton of money and then bring out a lot of these developers in terms of the mindshare onto building for shitcoin projects. But we're seeing a lot more individuals flock towards Bitcoin as they realize a lot more of the resilience that they're looking for in terms of both freedom and an actual monetary network to use for, global remittances on Bitcoin, as opposed to some of these other chains. We're seeing a lot more people build on Bitcoin. That's one. We're seeing a lot more people get interested to actually learn about Bitcoin, both from a developer perspective and in terms of average individuals trying to use Bitcoin. Another good thing that we're seeing is, with the introduction of Gala, for example, which I'm a part of. And the good thing or the great thing with Gala is already we're currently, having, the 13 participants, which will be graduating into the ecosystem to actually get Bitcoin jobs. So the cool thing with this project is we're allowing developers not only to learn about Bitcoin, but to actually practically have projects that they build on Bitcoin in order to build out their portfolio and actually look at ways in which they can improve Bitcoin, or at least improve the usage of Bitcoin on the continent. So they're kind of localizing the context of Bitcoin development through this program. So we're going to be seeing a lot more projects like Gala come up. We're going to see a lot more people engaging in language translation. We're going to see a lot more wallets and services integrate the Lightning Network, especially, and a lot more people trying to look at Bitcoin as more than just a speculative asset, like I said, and a true financial freedom tool.
Yeah. When you think about Recursive Capital, which you're the CEO and I believe CTO of as well, it is focused on doing what? Investing in infrastructure around Bitcoin and bringing it to some of these nations?
Yeah, so we're looking at it at a broader context, like I like to say, which the thing is, we're trying to be active investors, not just passive investors. So one of the things that we're looking at doing is providing as much value into the ecosystem, especially when it comes to portfolio companies we're invested in or just in general. So in terms of how we're trying to look at it from, let's say, 5 to 10 years, we're looking at actually having Recursive Capital not only invest in portfolio companies, but actually have an arm, which is Recursive Labs, that'll be engaging in, sort of liquidity management, liquidity provision, integration of Lightning and Bitcoin, as well as looking at another arm, which is recursive research that will be dealing with research and development in the continent and pumping out newsletters and research reports. But specifically with regards to your question about us investing, what we're looking at is we're looking at infrastructure as well as some of the wallets and products and services. So when we say infrastructure, we like to look at it as not only mining, we're also talking about node software, for example. We're also looking at products and services that allow for second layer solutions themselves, products that are built on those second layer solutions, and kind of the general infrastructure around Bitcoin that enables it to continue to be a resilient monetary network.
Yeah, it's fascinating to kind of think about just how much work needs to be done. What's been the response from the local tech community? Like in the United States, people who are focused on Bitcoin, they're seen as a little crazy, even in the tech community, which likes to kind of hold the flag of innovation and progress. What is it like in some of these areas where maybe the tech community they're into Bitcoin or are they not? And like, what's their response been?
Yeah, it's been a bumpy ride to say the least. Initially, when we started out, back in 2020, which is not really that long ago, but in Bitcoin terms, that's like a decade ago. What we started seeing was a lot of people go, hey, this Bitcoin thing is a scam. We're not really feeling this. We might as well focus on fintech. It's proven out the ecosystem is there, is developed. And we're like, you guys need to realize that this is the future of not only money, but financial freedom. And they're like, yeah, we'll see. And then what started happening over the years is, as more companies came on, the BitNobs, ETC, even the Bitcoins early on, a lot of people started realizing that there's more to it than just, like I said, speculation, especially with, using dollar cost averaging through BitNob, for example. That opened up the gates in terms of allowing people to not only use Bitcoin as a savings mechanism, but to have it, actually growing their wealth. And that was a huge sell, especially for the younger guys or younger generation. So we're starting to see a lot more people respect the space, or at least acknowledge that it exists. That's one. Two, in terms of the investor landscape, we're looking at a lot more, or we're seeing a lot more investors being open to Bitcoin and actually being open to investing in companies in this space. So our conversations have become a lot more friendly when it comes to the investors and a lot more receptive, which is really great for the overall ecosystem, because it means now we have capital that will likely come in and flood the gates and actually invest in these companies to grow the ecosystem as a whole.
Yeah. My last question, then my brother's got a couple of questions for you, is the Bitcoin Trust. My understanding is that about 7,000 people from around the world applied to be involved in some form or fashion. You were selected as one of those individuals. You're on the board of the Bitcoin Trust, which is Jack Dorsey's effort. Talk to me, why were you interested in participating, and then what are you guys doing there in that body of work?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's good to be on Twitter is all I have to say, because initially I got the request DM'd to me by my older brother. He was like, hey dude, why don't you try this? And I was like, yeah, just this, little kid in the ecosystem, just being a dev. And they're like, yeah, but worst case you wouldn't get in. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. So I got in. And really the main reason why I wanted to, apply, or I did apply, is because I see ourselves as having a lot of responsibility going forward in terms of growing the space. Actively speaking, like you mentioned, the space is really, really, it's really in its infancy, which means there's a lot to do. So one of the things I was thinking about, especially going through the process, which was, at least initially, it took quite a while for them to get back to us. And to your point, that is, I guess now, because we know there are like 70 people who applied. So initially after they got back, I was like, oh, wow, I'm still in. So after that, throughout the process, what was happening was, I'm getting back in terms of providing our feedback, in terms of outlining issues in the ecosystem. How are we going to actually tackle these issues? Because outlining issues is very, very easy. So what started happening was I started documenting really what I was going through in terms of the back and forth we were having all the way up to the interview process. So that was initially what eventually morphed into an article that I dropped in Bitcoin Magazine about growing the ecosystem in Africa. So the way I see it is, in general, we're talking about growing the ecosystem. Really, it has to be multifaceted. Like I said, has to not only be in terms of trying to get the developer efforts to a stage where it's not only competing at the global stage, but is actually leading in terms of development. We also have to look at things like language translation, which I think is going to be increasingly important now as we're looking to hit demographics that are multilingual. So one of the things that we're primarily looking at on Btrust is actually trying to, number one, maintain a set of really rigid principles going forward and outline how we're trying to grow the ecosystem in a really clear and concise way so that we don't trip ourselves up, so that we have a clear path in terms of achieving the goals that we want. So we're looking at obviously being Bitcoin only. That's one, the huge important one. We're looking at ensuring that we have transparency throughout the process while still respecting, the privacy of some of the board members like myself. Obviously, we don't want individuals coming up and mugging me or some of the other board members like Carla and the rest that live on the continent. So we're really looking at ways to grow the ecosystem, and that will initially be focusing specifically on open source development and specifically on developers, especially through grant style funding, which is what we're primarily looking at. And obviously the target demographic or the target geography initially going on is, Africa. So really that's kind of the overall gist and a quick brief of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I love this. Joe John, what questions do you guys have?
My question would just be on kind of the progress that's been made in Africa specifically. Just talk me through kind of how you think about that today. I don't know if you want to give them a grade, but just generally how you view the progress and how much further there is still to go.
Yeah, it's like I said, we're still at the infant stages, really, in a global terms, really, not even at a local context. So I'll still leave some room for leniency when it comes to the grading. So I'll give it a B+, just because the development has been almost exponential in terms of not only the products we're seeing, but the heightened interest and as well as the conscientiousness of actual average folks using Bitcoin. So I think there's still a lot to be done, specifically when it comes to integrating our average fintech rails, which are all right, to actually leverage Bitcoin, which will make it supercharged and allow us to actually have a proper monetary network that we can then build future products and services and actually lead the continent away from some of these, some of the shackles of some of the currencies the Francophone countries are going through, for example. So looking at it from the point of view of how do we not only help with Bitcoin development in general, because Bitcoin development is decentralized, which is really great. So it means any sort of development that happens outside of the continent as well as within the continent compounds the sort of benefit that we see globally, even at the local level as well, which is really good. So what it means is, for example, if we have a Stripe working really hard in terms of providing Lightning integration all the way outside of the shores of the continent, as well as having some of these products and services on the continent, integrating Lightning, it means all the access that we have in terms of sending money abroad and at home are now supercharged and are now not only allowed to be freely opening, the floodgates to individuals providing serious monetary network that allows them to actually access money and send it back and forth globally cheaply, which is impossible to do with the current system, then I think we're on the good side. So it means obviously that we have to focus on trying to really increase this development in a way that obviously is conscious of the local context that we're operating in, as well as trying to make it very easy for individuals to use, because that's the number one thing that we have to consider if we're trying to onboard as many people as possible. It's not fair enough that Bitcoin is a superior monetary network. It has to be easy to use for them. So we're looking at ways to actually fund companies that are looking into this deeply, as well as actually trying to ensure that we're building out infrastructure that supports this development too. So like I said, mesh networking and some of these other resilient internet infrastructure as well.
Abubakar, you talked about that onboarding process. Can you talk about the education that's available to kind of get people involved and just interested in general and knowing what Bitcoin is?
Yeah, so there's been great progress on that end. So initially what started happening is some of the local communities started self-organizing at a really small scale. So a bunch of small startups here and there, and then, well, not startups, meetups, a bunch of them here and there. So some happening in Lagos, some happening in Kaduna where I am. And then what started happening is individuals recognizing, like I said, the benefit of Bitcoin and starting to see it more than just a speculative asset and then now starting to see it as a proper investment mechanism, a proper monetary network via the Lightning Network, cheap payments, all that kind of great stuff. And really as a liberating force. So in terms of education right now, we're seeing a lot more people not only translate material, which is key and important, but there's a lot more material available really in general when it comes to Bitcoin. So both in terms of allowing people to understand how to use it correctly. So you're not address reusing, for example, allowing them to understand some of the tools and services that are available. So let's say I would like to send, my friend 2,000 Naira, for example, and all I have is Bitcoin and all they have is a bank account. You can actually use a service called Coin Profile, which you just send Bitcoin to an address and then it does a bank transfer on your end. So the cool thing with that is obviously is not only allows you to communicate back and forth between the legacy and the future system that we're thinking about is we're also looking at a lot more people starting to really try and leverage the existing, hubs, for example, the tech hubs, which is something I'm really closely involved in doing, especially in Kaduna, which is trying to use these existing structures to actually propagate the Bitcoin message. Because again, it's a lot harder to start up all these ecosystems from scratch. Why don't we just plug into the existing tech ecosystem, which is what we're trying to do. So yeah, it's getting there. There's a lot to do. I'm really excited, as you can tell. So yeah, we'll likely see, the continent progress to an A+.
When you think about what's needed, right? If you could get the word out to, whether it's other folks in Africa or folks that are not in Africa, what is the two things that you would say, okay, if we can solve problem A, problem B, this will drastically increase adoption, awareness, and ultimately kind of deliver this solution to the people who need it most?
I say primarily we need a lot more quality developers working in the space, because currently at the moment, outside of the Gala program, for example, we're not seeing too many developers in the space. And when I say developers, I mean Bitcoin only developers, because currently what's happening, like I told you, is a lot of tech engineers that we have on the continent, but the issue is they're flocking over to building on some of these other chains again, as a result of some of the grant programs that those other chains have and some of the money that just indiscriminately throwing on the continent. So I think definitely having a lot more developers work in the space is going to provide a huge net positive. Another thing that I think is really, really important is having the capital to invest in some of these companies that are trying to solve a lot of the problems that we see here locally. So I think it's definitely having the developers and then as well as having some capital. And if there's room for a third, I say definitely education, because without that, again, if individuals don't know about Bitcoin, then we're really building for no one.
Yeah, it feels like the developer specifically is a huge component all around the world. And then I guess one other piece of it is you mentioned translation as a key piece. Are there other kind of on the ground specifics that are very obvious maybe to people who live in these economies, but to kind of a Western or more American focused audience, they may not realize just like the blocking and tackling that's needed to get this done and get people educated and aware?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, a lot of people obviously that have the privilege of being English speakers kind of overlook this common facet of when it comes to actual education, because what they see is, I can speak English, the world is English, whereas that's not the case. There are a lot of languages, especially on a continent as diverse as Africa. A lot of these other countries are actually even French-speaking countries, and some of the other languages as well. So I like to give this example really is to think of it as, imagine having, all this Bitcoin information locked in hieroglyphics. So this is before the time of the Rosetta Stone. I mean, if that was the case, then there wouldn't be any progress in terms of actually allowing this proliferation that we need to individuals who actually need Bitcoin, which is outside of more of the developed nations that you're talking about. So really, when it comes to language translation, is a huge, huge component of education again, because you're unlocking the secrets of the universe, so to speak, which is allowing individuals to actually know about Bitcoin, learn how to use it, having all these practices and documentation about learning how to use these tools readily available to individuals. So I think obviously the way forward with regards to that is funding some of these projects and individuals that are hard at work in terms of translating. So, Calcas and some of the individuals around the continent doing work on that. Another thing obviously is reaching out to some of these tech ecosystems. Like I said, there are already existing tech hubs who are even, cater to non-English speaking demographics. So what you'd be doing is keying into those ecosystems and saying, hey, let's partner and actually translate some of this Bitcoin material we have. And they're like, okay, yeah, let's go for it. And then like that, you could actually have this sort of grassroots movement where you're having to leverage all these existing infrastructures to provide this language translation as well. So I think really that's at least one way we could go about it, especially. So yeah, it's a huge part, definitely.
All right, before we get finished here, I want to just fire off some questions and you just answer as we go. Ready?
Yeah.
Favorite Bitcoin memory so far?
I'd say my first pull request back in 2019.
Sick. Most memorable conversation or lesson learned from Jack Dorsey?
I definitely say it's one of the combos that we had early on in the process, where we're talking about the general importance of Bitcoin on the continent. It was at least it was a really good combo from the perspective of how he outlined some of the things that were kind of missing in my thinking, and also looking at ways in which we could actually provide the change that we need to. So it was really robust conversation. I definitely say that's one of the most memorable ones.
Amazing. In your eyes, Bitcoin means fill in the blank.
Financial freedom.
I love it. Sleep schedule. One of our sponsors is 8 Sleep. What's your sleep schedule?
Oof, it's effed up. Let's just say I'm a night owl. But yeah, it depends. On weekdays, I'm a lot more sane. Weekends, it's just all over the place.
All right, like 4 hours or like 6 hours? Like what when you say it's messed up, like how bad is it?
Let's just say some days I get 2-3 hours.
Oh, we got a fan. Listen, we need you for the long haul, buddy. We're gonna have to get you sleeping at least 6. All right,
It's getting better.
all right. Looking forward, the milestone you're most looking forward to.
Getting a lot more developers in the ecosystem, that's for sure.
Okay. The first African nation to move on to the Bitcoin standard is
I'd like to say Nigeria, but I don't think that's realistic. There'll probably be some other smaller country.
a smaller one. Okay. And then lastly is your Twitter account is at I hate 1999. What's the story with that?
Yeah, so I joined Twitter back in like 2010 when I was about 11 years old. So only God knows why I chose that.
Oh, so you literally just, when you first signed up, that's what you chose and you just kept it.
Yeah, it was too late to change over the years. So I just went, might as well just keep it.
What year were you born?
1999.
I love
Which is
that.
why
All
I'm
right.
confused, like, only God knows now.
Listen, it provides something that's memorable. No one will forget your Twitter account, right?
Fair point.
All right, sounds good. What other than Twitter, where else can we send people to find out more about Recursive, about Bitcoin Trust, or about yourself?
Oof, I definitely say they should probably look at our website if it's recursive related. So it's rcrsb.xyz.
All right. Listen, buddy, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm super excited. I would love to bring you back kind of over the next couple of months as things develop. I feel like various countries in Africa are at the absolute forefront of not only the need, but also of adoption, right? We've seen the numbers that are self-reported, but still the numbers around Nigeria and a few other countries. And so just understanding what's happening there, I think is going to be a huge piece of folks both on the continent, but also off, really seeing here is the true value of this technology and what it can do for people. So we'll definitely have you come back and kind of keep us updated on that, along with the other work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And, I just continue the work that we're doing, especially with regards to fundraising at Recursive as well, because we're actively fundraising right now. So there's a lot of convos that'll be had. Hopefully next time I come on, I have some interesting stories to share with you guys.
I love it. I think that that would be a ton of fun. So thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Talk later.